guys, welcome back to the Discipline Life Podcast, the place where we talk all about power differential relationships and domestic discipline. I'm Arya, and this is my husband, Coda.
Hello, everyone.
And on today's podcast, we are going to be talking about how having a domestic discipline relationship has improved our relationship.
Because it has.
Has it?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think so anyway.
I'm the one that gets to poke at you a little bit today.
Did I poke at you last week?
You usually do a little.
Well,
all in good fun.
It is. Absolutely. Absolutely. So do you want to start or?
I was going to say, before we get too far into the topic, I just wanted to thank everyone who is listening on YouTube. And if you are not yet, please do consider subscribing. We are almost at 500 at the time of recording this podcast. We're only a few subscribers away from that milestone. And
That's amazing.
We're really thankful for everyone who's listening and subscribed over there. Once you subscribe, hit the notification bell to be notified when we upload new content. And if you want to get bonus content, please consider joining us on Patreon. The link to that is in the description box.
Indeed.
So, how has domestic discipline and the implementation of domestic discipline improved our overall relationship? That's kind of where we want to take this conversation. And I was going to ask you if you wanted to start.
Oh, sure. I mean, I can. Well, for starters, I think we've talked about this a little bit on past podcasts, but maybe we want to go into more detail. I don't know. But I would say that I think I feel that this has helped us grow closer together as a couple. It's really has helped build trust, and I think that it also has helped us communicate.
I was just gonna say when you said grow closer together, I was gonna follow that up with I feel like our communication has gotten so much better. Our ability to communicate with one another, my ability to communicate with you has definitely improved.
I think that's true. And so I definitely think that beforehand, it's not that, like, I don't want to give people to have the impression that, boy, we just never communicated. There was a lack of trust between us that was absolutely awful, and our relationship was just in the worst place it could possibly be. I don't think it was that.
No, I would say, like, if you're doing like a scale of 1 to 10, I would say that our relationship before domestic discipline was a solid 7, where now I would put us closer to like a 9.
Okay, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
That number.
And it's not that our communication was bad by any means, but I definitely feel like I am more open, and I feel like before domestic discipline, before we really started implementing this, like, you know, radical communication and openness in our relationship, I feel like I was more guarded.
Oh, really?
And I feel like I was trying to subconsciously, it wasn't a conscious thing, but I feel like I was subconsciously trying to protect my feelings from...
That you couldn't be open and honest about those feelings.
Right. And it's not that I didn't trust you. It was more of just a defense mechanism from, like, past experiences.
Right.
Where after domestic discipline and really breaking down those barriers and growing closer together, I feel like I was able to let that guard down and be more open. And that's where my ability to communicate and be more open with you has improved.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I didn't realize, sorry, that was kind of a epiphany for me, that you felt maybe a little guarded.
Yeah, that's the word I used.
To use? Yeah, okay, that's the one I thought that you used. So now you don't feel as guarded because you feel like you can be open?
Right, because I feel like because the process of implementing domestic discipline and really putting myself under your authority in a tangible way, and especially the process of punishment and maintenance and all of that. It's such a vulnerable process,
Right.
that it stripped away that because I could not have that barrier within that process.
Right.
It stripped that away, and it made me more comfortable with being more open, more vulnerable, and allowing you to see me in a more authentic way.
Yeah. Because I share those feelings. Like, I didn't realize until we started this how guarded I was being, and realizing that I felt, I guess I didn't realize that I could be myself. And again, we talked about this before on podcasts, where because we tend to live in a world where things are a little out of whack, especially as a guy. I was trying to figure out, okay, where is it that I fit in the relationship? What's considered overstepping the bounds a little bit? What is not? And so when we started this, I felt like, oh, I can finally be myself. I can be upfront and honest with things that I feel like that I need from our relationship. And I thought it was very, very interesting that when we started this, when we started talking about implementing it, it was so refreshing to realize, oh, wait, some of the things that I was dealing with, you were also dealing with them. You also were hoping that this was something we could implement into our relationship. And so I realized, oh, I don't have to be afraid to be open and honest in the relationship. Not that I was keeping anything from you, but there was a certain amount of cautiousness, not a good cautiousness, that I felt like I could now be open with, and I didn't have to hide behind anything.
And on that kind of piggybacking off of that sentiment, I feel like another way that domestic discipline has really improved our relationship is it has brought us together with a central focus.
Yes, that's a great way to say it. Yeah.
Because, again, we've always worked together as a team in our relationship. I think that part of that is, part of that is kind of luck to a certain extent, because we were really young when we got married. I feel like we had vision for our future, but I don't know if it was realistic, and I don't think we really had a tangible plan.
Right. No, I would agree with that.
So some of this is kind of by the sheer luck and some youthful naivety that we had.
Which can be good or bad depending on who you ask, right?
Right. And so, but implementing domestic discipline just really brought us together with a central focus, and really it brought me into a better understanding of your goals and vision and leadership for our family, and allowed me to express my support and submission to that goal and leadership
Right.
that you held.
Yes, and I felt like, for me, it allowed me to, like you said, it allowed me to become the leader that I wanted to be and everything. But as such, I could then support you in the areas that you needed to be supportive, that you wanted to take a back seat on. You didn't have to be having that pressure of, oh, I have to take the front seat or the lead on certain things. These are areas where he's been wanting to take the lead. It's okay for him to do that. And that has been, I think that was a de-stressor for both of us.
Absolutely. And speaking of like you supporting me, I feel like being in domestic discipline and having this open communication and very authentic communication has given you the ability to be better at supporting me emotionally.
Right.
I also think that now correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm kind of speaking for you here, but this is an observation that I've made. I feel like domestic discipline has allowed you to step more into your masculinity in our relationship. And it has allowed you to see me as more feminine. And it's allowed you to understand the differences between those two things and be more, sympathetic seems like the wrong word, but be more in tune to
That's a good word.
how I am different than you and how I need your support to be presented differently.
Yes, I think all of those things, because of kind of the society that we currently live in, I was very, very afraid to be I wasn't not that I was trying to be feminine, but I was very, very afraid to lean into my masculinity in many, many ways.
Well, growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s,
Yes.
we were socialized to understand
Be more of the cultural norms kind of thing.
Right. The cultural norm was that men and women were viewed as being very equal.
Yes.
Society was viewed as egalitarian. And especially back then, that's where you really saw this rise of radical equality from the standpoint of, presenting it in a way that men and women have to not only be equal, but also they were socialized to be exactly the same, and,
Right.
and we're not. I mean,
no, not at all.
men and women can go through the same experience and have radically different personal accounts
Really?
of
You
that
sure?
experience because of how we intake information and how we process, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not your fault, but you were treating me as if I were to understand and respond to things that were going on exactly the way you would.
Yes, that actually is very well said. Yeah, absolutely. Because of what you just said, and I'm going to reiterate a little bit that we just grew up in a time where it was okay. We are equal, which I agree with that sentiment. We are equal, but because we are equal, that means we think exactly the same. They tried to make this distinction that men and women are exactly the same in every way.
Right, and when you say, sorry, excuse me, when you say that you agree with the sentiment that we're equal, I just want to clarify that you and I share this, that we believe that men and women are of equal value
exactly,
and standing within society.
Correct.
But when it comes to relationships, we
obviously
we believe in power differential, we believe in polarity.
Correct.
Whether or not that includes domestic discipline is up to the couple, but we believe that relationships function better with a leader and a subordinate.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that my personhood is less valuable
Correct.
because of our relationship.
Exactly.
And if you were to start to devalue or offend my personhood and my autonomy, then that would be an issue.
Right. Yeah, so when you said earlier, I'm going to backtrack again.
Yes,
now.
please.
When you said earlier that you felt like I could lean into my masculinity, I think is how you said it. That's absolutely true. Because, believe it or not, I mean, it's gotten worse. There's no doubt about it. It's gotten worse now. But even in the early 90s when I was growing up, there was a little bin of this underlining thing of, you can't be too masculine, because if you're too masculine, then people, that's the kind of guy that gets in trouble, and that's the kind of guy that starts fights and does demean girls and all this kind of thing. And so I was afraid to lean into that. But once we started delving into this, and I realized, wait a minute, I can lean into that in a good way, in a positive way.
I was about to say, because I think that, again, we've kind of touched on toxic masculinity a little bit.
Right, I didn't want to go into that too much. I just wanted to kind of brush over it a little bit.
But really, masculinity is not an issue if it has direction and focus, and if it is nurtured in a positive way.
Yes, right.
And again, I feel like that's just something that is being stepped away from more
Absolutely.
and more. And it
Yeah.
started when we were teenagers.
Right. And so that's what I'm saying is like all of my experiences were just that it was like those were negative things. Like that those were not things that you should do as a boy that I was at the time into becoming a man. And then I realized, wait a minute, these are things that my wife now is saying, no, I would like you to do those things. I would like you to that is not a toxic masculinity thing. These are things that, and so I naturally was like, well, okay, she's wanting me to do them. I want to do them. It must be okay. And by us delving into the domestic discipline side of our relationship, I realized, oh, wow, it is okay. It absolutely is okay for me to lean into these things. Mm-hmm. And at the same regard, I think you are right. I have observed, and then you might want to go into more detail if you want to. I have observed that I think it has allowed you to then lean into your feminine side, to feel like it's okay to be a woman, to feel like it's okay to, you don't have to take on traits that usually are masculine traits. You don't have to take those on, and you can still be a strong woman, a woman of conviction, however you want to say that, but be feminine, be gentle, be all of those things that I think are positive things about women. And it was amazing how when we clicked into those things, and I think it's really awesome to, and I need to point out, we started leaning into those things, but neither one of us felt that we had become the doormat and one had become the dictator.
No,
we
no,
just
not
leaned
at all.
into those, and it worked out really well.
And I think it's because we already had a foundation of a relationship where we valued the contribution that each other made.
Yes, that's true.
And we valued who we were as people and who we were as a couple. And so when we leaned into those roles, that value didn't go away.
Yes, right.
And again, even though I am the submissive wife and I am taking that subordinate position, I know that if you were to overstep those boundaries, if you were to start to get into a place where you were not respecting my limits, my boundaries, my personhood.
Yes.
If you were starting to become demeaning, I could pump the brakes, and I feel empowered to step up and say, "Hey, that's not okay with me."
Right. Right.
And part of that is that because I know that our relationship is built on this trust.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is because I know that we live in a society where I'm not stuck.
Right, right.
And so all of those things are good things.
Yes.
Because I know that I have the safety net, I can lean into that femininity without the fear of losing rights, without the fear of losing myself.
That's very good.
And I feel like that is really what makes me, and I think many other women, able to really embrace femininity and embrace being submissive and embrace this role in our relationship, is that security.
Yes.
I feel secure in our relationship because I know that you are going to provide and protect. I don't have to worry about those things. I don't have to think about those things. And that gives me the security to say, okay, now I can focus all of my energy into these areas, these tasks, because we've talked about before too, how, housework and
it's not my thing. No, I know.
it's not intrinsically a submissive duty. It's not intrinsically a gendered duty.
Right.
And so if a husband and wife want to split tasks in the home, and especially in like caring for children and stuff, that is completely up to them. And it doesn't make the wife less submissive. It doesn't make the husband less dominant or less of a leader in his home to do the dishes, for instance. And especially if the wife is working, then you're going to have to find a balance, because there's only so many hours in the day, and a burnt out, overstressed wife is not a feminine, submissive, happy wife.
That's true. Yep.
She gets burnt out. She gets stressed out. She gets snippy. She's more likely to get into that masculine headspace of feeling like she has to do the lion's share of the work.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that there's a balance so that she feels like she has space to really embrace this femininity, and that she's not feeling overworked and burnt out.
Yeah.
And so if she's working outside the home, then you need to find a balance within the home. But for our dynamic, since I am home all day, I'm a stay-at-home wife, and you are the income earner for our home, I feel like the natural divide there is that I take care of the domestics.
Right.
And so, and I enjoy doing that.
I was going to say, that's something
part.
that you, I mean, it's not like it's always a bed of roses, you know.
Sure. I mean, there's some things that it's like, okay, we just got to get this done. But for the most part, I enjoy that. And I can lean into those aspects because I know that you are going to provide our income. So I can have the security to just lean into taking care of the home. Right. I know that you are going to protect me from things that I don't need to be exposed to. One of those things, I mean, part of that is that there's been people that have come to you and say, oh, you know, would Arya want to do this or that, and like volunteer opportunities or different things? And you've said no on my behalf.
I have. Yeah.
Even without talking to me.
Correct. Because I know.
Because you know that I have a hard time saying no. And you know that I don't need to be overcommitting myself to things that in the long, broad scheme of things are not going to be beneficial to me, our relationship, our home, or our family.
Correct.
And so that is one way that you protect me. I mean, obviously, if someone were to try to break into our home, you would protect me in a more tangible way. But luckily, that doesn't happen.
Knock on wood.
Ever.
I was going to say, I'm knock on wood here.
That's never happened to us.
Yeah, praise the Lord.
Yeah, that's something that is a really good thing. But there's different forms of protection. And I feel like because you provide that protection for me, I can then just kind of flourish, right?
Yeah. And if I can just interrupt just for a second, I mean, I was going to say that same thing on my side, is that because you're now you're leaning into that and taking care of that, of the household and all of those things, it is easier for me to go out and make a living for us and to not have to worry about, oh, geez, when I get home, I need to start dinner. I need to, I don't mind helping to do those things. Just like we were saying, like, oh, I got to do the dish. I don't mind doing that kind of stuff. But because we have leaned into these roles, I feel like I can go to work. I can focus on those things. And we mentioned before that I'm also doubling and going to school. I can focus on those things because I know, hey, Arya has this taken care of at home. I don't have to worry about this. If she does need some help, obviously, you know, I will help. But for the most part, it's like, okay, she's doing her thing, I'm doing my thing. But it is to help the collective of our family, to help each other, and to help us not only in our relationship, but in our child's life and everything else. And so it goes the same way where I don't have to worry about things. And
I think that that's really the key, is once we started implementing domestic discipline and we got on to the same page with all of that, it is a collective.
Yes.
It's not you and I working alongside each other in opposite directions.
Correct. It's for the greater good.
And it's for one goal.
Yes. Yes, the one goal.
So.
And that is, like we've talked a lot about, obviously, I'm earning the money, you're keeping the house clean, all that kind of stuff. It's not just for those physical, tangible things. It's for the other thing too. It's for what we were talking about, for the closeness, for the connection, for emotional stability, all of those things.
Right, because
as well, the things that you can't see.
Because with rare exception, my goal is to make it to where when you come home at the end of the day, you don't have to worry about helping me with tasks around the house, so that when you're home, you can relax. You can enjoy spending time with me as your wife. You can enjoy spending time with our child.
Yes.
And we can have that rest, that time to rest and recuperate and reconnect in the evening.
Right.
And we do our very best to kind of protect that time.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, you do
we
your...
do. Yeah, we try really hard to do that. Sometimes we don't always succeed, but I'd say 9 times out of 10, we do succeed at that.
Right, because, I mean,
we
obviously,
really
if I'm sick or if I have had an overwhelming day or if things have gotten away from me, I might, we might need to work together to get stuff done, or we may decide to just let stuff wait.
Wait, exactly.
And that's kind of a case-by-case basis.
And that's okay.
For the most part, I try to get everything done so that by the time we finish up dinner, we have the rest of our evening to just have that time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because and I think I would bring that up too. That has, because of that has allowed us to protect that time that we need to spend together, you and I, and also the family time that we try to have on the weekends, especially with our daughter.
Well, and because we have fallen into this before, because we're not perfect and life gets away from us.
What? We're not perfect? What?
But there have been times in the past where we didn't protect that time as closely.
Like we should have.
And I felt like our relationship was becoming more just because it was like you would make time for maintenance spanking and you would make time for discipline, but there wasn't that time just to reconnect, to spend time together, to relationship build. And I had to come to you and be like, I feel like you have just assumed this role of disciplinarian, and I feel like I'm losing my husband.
Yeah.
I'm losing my confidant.
And I did have that for a while. Yeah. I was kind of more the disciplinarian than I was the husband.
And so that was obviously something that we had to talk about and recalibrate and reconnect in a more relational way.
Yeah.
Because you can't have one without the other. It has to be a balance.
Yeah. And, balance can be hard to find.
And hard to maintain.
Yeah. I was going to say, everybody listening, I know, can relate. I know we're not the only ones that have a hard time maintaining balance.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Another way that I feel like domestic discipline has improved our relationship overall is we argue a lot less.
Yeah, and it's not that we had a ton of arguments before, but okay, tell me if you think I'm exaggerating, because I don't want to tell these people lies. But so tell me if you think I'm exaggerating this a little bit. But I'd say we have maybe 1 or 2 arguments every 6 months, maybe? Is that exaggerated a little bit?
I would say 1 or 2 arguments a year. Okay,
so maybe I underdid it, but where before it wasn't like we were arguing all the time, but that number was much higher.
Well, no,
for sure.
Here's the real part that I feel like has changed a lot, because where before we may have been arguing every few months, we would have a bigger argument.
Right.
But here's the real thing: is I feel like in our relationship, even from the beginning, we didn't argue a lot, but when we did, it was bad.
Yeah, right, exactly. We didn't argue a lot, but they were, it was like nuclear level.
I feel like that has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Our arguments now are a lot less severe when they happen.
Yes.
They don't happen as often, but here's the real big change. Is in between those big arguments, we wouldn't necessarily argue, but there would be little nitpicky things.
Yeah, little
little digs, little nitpicky
Digs, that's the word.
arguments.
Yeah,
little,
that's the word I was looking
like
for.
not real big
Yeah.
arguments, but just those little digs, those little nitpicky, those little like combative interactions.
Yeah, exactly.
And those would happen, once or twice a week. I feel like in between those bigger arguments, those don't happen really at all anymore.
None at all. Yeah.
We don't
I would
nitpick
agree.
each other. I definitely don't nitpick you. I don't.
No, you definitely don't. I was going to say that has pretty much like disappeared altogether, I would say.
Well, because we established that was a very disrespectful thing to do.
Exactly.
And we have ways to discourage and handle disrespect in our relationship now.
I think we do, yes.
And because there is a consequence for that, because there is repercussions,
Yep.
I am more attuned to, because I don't think I was realizing what I was doing before.
I agree.
And
Yeah.
then once you start pointing it out, once you start holding me accountable, once I start being punished for doing those things,
You kind of woke up to that.
I became more aware of what I was doing, and I
Yeah.
was able to change my behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so that, I mean, to me, that is, if there's nothing else good that came out of this, which there was, just the fact that we almost have eliminated arguments completely is a really, really good thing. I mean, I would never say we have eliminated it completely because I don't think that's realistic.
No.
To ever expect out of a relationship, but it's and because and the reason that is because because we were talking about earlier about us being able to lean into those things that we weren't able to lean into before. I think that helped us realize some of those things that were just petty things to pick at and to do, and therefore and because of those things and not being picky at each other and all, because we enjoy each other's company more.
Absolutely.
We lean into enjoying that time together. I mean, it's not that I ever dreaded coming home and spending time with you, but because of this now, it's definitely something I look forward to. It's something like, oh man, this is great. I've had a long day at work or school or both in a lot of areas. I get to come home, have this wonderful meal, and then enjoy time with my wife. And that's important. And I think that has to where before it was somewhat of an anticipation. It is an anticipation now. Mm-hmm. It is something I look forward to. It's not like, oh, geez, now I got to go home. Not at all. In fact, I feel bad for people who have that because I don't ever feel that way. And if anything, coming home, it's like, oh, thank God I get to go home. Thank you, God.
And that's not to say that our life is without stress, because
oh yeah, no, not at all.
Every phase of life that we've gone through, and I anticipate this continuing to be the trend. There's new stresses. There's different stresses,
Sure.
right? So I mean, having a newborn,
you never will eliminate all the stress ever.
Right. Like during that honeymoon phase, the first 3 years of our marriage, we were getting to know each other. We were getting to know how to coexist under one roof.
Sleep in the same bed.
We were trying to figure out how to navigate our relationship as a married couple. And then right after our 3rd anniversary, I had our daughter. And so we were having to navigate having a newborn.
Being parents now.
Yeah. And how to do all of that. And then at that time, I also left my job.
Yep.
And so we took about a 60% pay cut when I left my job.
It was huge.
It was big, and we were not high income earners. So we went from having like enough to really not having enough. But
we just, how we ate was, because, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and the reason we did that is because all of my income would have gone to daycare anyway. So we made the decision at that point we would just figure it out with me at home. And so I went from going to work every day, having kind of this lifestyle of a lot of structure in my day, to now being at the call of a newborn where there was no structure. There was, and it was hard, and
it was like going through a whirlwind.
And then you move into the toddler years, and anybody who's been through that knows that that's a very difficult stage of parenting.
Yeah. Right.
And then to move into, all of the things that we went through in her early elementary years, and we won't get into that just for privacy's sake. But now we're in the preteen years, and that's bringing in a whole new level of stress. And, you're wanting to handle situations one way, and I don't necessarily agree with that. However, my way didn't work either. And so now we're kind of at this and I would say that that's where we're at right now, but I anticipate once she starts driving, then that's going to be a new level of stress.
Oh,
and once she starts dating, that's going to be a new level of stress.
Can we put that off really long?
But then because I'm like, once she's out of the house, then our relationship will be perfect. We'll never argue. No, there will be new stresses at that point too.
Well, I've heard it said this way, and if there's any empty nesters listening to us, I'd be curious, you leaving in the comments what you think about this. But what I've heard is that, once the kids leave the nest, it's not, there can be some stresses, but also it's kind of like, okay, now we're back almost to a certain extent where we were before we had kids. So we're getting to know each other again on that level.
That can happen, but I kind of feel like because we've cultivated this communication, this closeness, I anticipate the stresses be more about okay, now that we're not financially responsible for a minor child, now we're going to have the stress of how do we structure our finances? That's the stress that I anticipate after that happening, is having to get on the same page with spending and saving and all of those things.
Buy a new car. No.
Sure.
No, that's a terrible idea. But no, you're absolutely. And so I think that's also why, to bring it back home just a little bit, exactly why we embraced this is because we knew this consistency, this idea of a domestic discipline relationship gives us the consistency enough that as we go through those seasons in life and those new challenges and those new stresses, there is something stable that we can hold on to.
And we're continuing to maintain and build our relationship to withstand that changing weather and those changing storms of life, right?
Just happens.
And so we are, unlike people that we've seen in our own lives where they just had the relationship and they thought it was great and they never maintained, they never rebuilt into it, they never really poured into their relationship. They just kind of rested on the fact that they had a great dating and they had a great engagement. Maybe they had a great honeymoon period, and then the stress of life came and they kind of ignored their relationship. And eventually we've seen this in our own lives where it falls apart.
Yes.
Yeah. Or they do get to that point where the kids are out of the house and then they don't know each other anymore.
Yeah, and we've seen some really sad relationships end because of that.
And so domestic discipline has given us the ability to, in a way that works for our lifestyle, focus in on our relationship and continue to maintain and build our relationship so that we remain solid through those changes.
Yeah.
Because stress is inevitable, but we don't have to argue.
No.
And we don't have to nitpick each other.
Nope.
And we don't have to become parallel individuals in a relationship. We can continue to be connected. We continue to have communication. We continue to have an enjoyable, fun relationship. And we continue to get to know each other every day.
Yeah, and what you realize is with a lot of that stuff, you realize how petty a lot of it really is. And realize, wow, even in my, the relationship that we have has helped me in other relationships in my life. Friendships and other things, because you realize, wow, there's a lot of things that people fight about and gripe about and ruin relationships over that are just not worth it.
Well,
So,
and I think that helps too, because when you're deciding how to handle a disagreement or an argument or a time when I have forgotten myself and become disrespectful,
right.
When you're trying to decide how to handle those things, I feel like you really consider the long-term ramifications to our relationship.
Always.
And that thoughtfulness allows me to just fully trust you. But I also think that it's important not to write everything off of like, oh, this isn't going to matter, because the argument may not matter. Yeah. The disagreement may not matter, but whether or not you allow an attitude of disrespect to foster and take root, that's what matters.
Oh yeah, no. What I was just saying is that it cuts to the heart of what you need to address and what really matters, as opposed to a lot of the noise that's out there.
And here's one thing that I feel like this is another way that domestic discipline has improved our relationship is I feel like you are more thoughtful in our relationship. You are more intentional.
I hope so. That was my hope. That was my goal.
And I feel like you look at intention rather than action.
Yes.
And sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's a detriment.
True.
But I really appreciate that you always look at, okay, she got upset about this and she may have had good reason, but is it okay for that attitude to go unchecked?
To exist and be unchecked. That's exactly right.
And I really appreciate that thoughtfulness and that intention that you have in our relationship. And I feel like domestic discipline gave you the ability to grow that skill and to have that mindset.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's a lot of skills that's why I mentioned earlier about with friendships and everything else. I think there's a lot of skills that I gained from this relationship that help me in everyday life as well, but definitely, obviously, in our relationship. So I think you summed it up quite nicely.
Do you have anything else to add before we get into the post show on Patreon?
I think I'm good.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. Again, if you are not subscribed, please do so. And we will see you at the post show if you're on Patreon. If you want to join our Patreon, the link is down below.
Okay. See you.